This video discusses why the Israeli Jews are courting disaster and fighting with the Palestinians. The message is directed particularly at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a patriotic Jew in Israel. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. The latest round of fighting between the Jews and Palestinians in Israel has ended in a ceasefire after 11 days of firing of about 4,000 rockets by Hamas and Israeli airstrikes and artillery fire in retaliation, leaving 243 Palestinians and 12 Israelis dead, including women and children. The ceasefire seems to be holding. The present violence erupted during the month of Ramadan, which began in mid-April, when Israel set up barriers to stop Palestinians from gathering in the evenings at the Old City. Palestinians began throwing stones at the police, viewing the barriers as designed to restrict their freedoms. But the Israeli police maintained that the barriers were meant to maintain order. The violence then spread to the Old City compound containing the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third holiest shrine. More than 300 Palestinians and more than 20 Israeli policemen were injured in the violence at the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. Then Hamas began firing rockets into Jewish cities and Israel retaliated. The ceasefire was brokered by Egypt. Another reason was that there was a long-running legal case in which Israelis obtained a court order to evict some Palestinian families from their homes in East Jerusalem and move in. Tension was high as a result of this case, which fueled the protests further. Though the protests started in the West Bank, Hamas in Gaza escalated the conflict because it appeared to be losing its hold over the Palestinians. By starting to fire rockets, it wanted to demonstrate to the Palestinians that it was a more vigorous defender of Palestinians' rights as compared to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank led by Mahmoud Abbas. Can the Israeli-Palestinian problem be resolved, leading to enduring peace? Many prominent world leaders and diplomats have tried to find a solution to the 73-year-old Jewish-Palestinian conflict in Israel, but it has defied solution. Former US President Donald Trump, through his son-in-law Jared Kushner, tried to make a breakthrough, but they were unsuccessful. I am not at all hopeful that a solution to the problem will ever be found through human efforts. Nobody will say flat out what the true reason for not finding a solution is. The Palestinians do not want a solution to the problem. Let me explain why before discussing why Israel also is not taking actions that indicate that it wants a solution to the problem. The Palestinians have never wanted a solution to the problem ever since Yasser Arafat's authority was stamped on Palestinian affairs. Before him, the only solution the Palestinians wanted was to drive the Jews into the Mediterranean Sea, and were quite confident that they would succeed because of the supposedly strong Arab armies. Then Arafat came on the scene. Arafat was a German stooge set up by them to harass and kill Jews and the British and American people. The Jews in Israel were hunting and prosecuting Nazis all around the world for crimes against humanity committed in the Holocaust during World War II. That's why the Germans clandestinely targeted the Jews and established Arafat as a Palestinian leader to punish them in Israel and around the world. No matter what solution is proposed, Palestinians won't take the necessary steps to implement it and will continue to claim the entire state of Israel as their own. Germans will not allow the Palestinians to agree to any solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In addition, in a document titled The Covenant of the Islamic Resistance Movement, or Hamas, dated August 18, 1988, Hamas makes it very clear that it seeks the utter destruction of Israel and takeover of the entire land of Palestine, entire land of Israel. Here are some excerpts. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. Then Article 7. The Islamic resistance movement is one of the links in the chain of the struggle against the Zionist invaders. It goes back to 1939 to the emergence of the martyr Izz al-Din al-Qassam and his brethren, the fighters, members of Muslim Brotherhood. It goes on to reach out and become one with another chain that includes the struggle of the Palestinians and Muslim Brotherhood in the 1948 war and the jihad operations of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1968 and after. The Prophet has said, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees." Then Article 11. The Islamic resistance movement believes that the land of Palestine is an Islamic waqf. Waqf means it's an Islamic endowment of property to be held in trust and used for a charitable or religious purpose. That the land of Palestine is an Islamic waqf consecrated for the future Muslim generations until Judgment Day. It or any part of it should not be squandered. It or any part of it should not be given up. Neither a single Arab country nor all Arab countries, neither any king or president, nor all the kings and presidents, neither any organization, nor all of them, be they Palestinian or Arab, possess the right to do that. This is the law governing the land of Palestine in the Islamic Sharia law, and the same goes for any land the Muslims have conquered by force. Then Article 13. Initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. This shows that negotiating with Hamas is a dead-end game. And continuing, there is no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad. Initiatives, proposals, and international conferences are all a waste of time and vain endeavors. The Palestinian people know better than to consent to having their future rights and fate toyed with. The Palestinian National Covenant, published in 1964 and amended in 1968, defines the Palestinian Liberation Organization's ideology, principles, and objectives. That covenant has not been amended, though Arafat conceded Israel's right to exist in a September 9, 1993 letter to Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin. Here are some excerpts from the covenant. Article 9. Armed struggle is the only way to liberate Palestine and is therefore a strategy and not a tactic. Article 15. The liberation of Palestine from an Arab viewpoint is a national duty to purge the Zionist presence from Palestine. Article 19. The partitioning of Palestine in 1947 and the establishment of Israel is fundamentally null and void, whatever time has elapsed. Article 20. The Balfour Declaration, the mandate document, and what has been based upon them are considered null and void. The claim of a historical and spiritual tie between the Jews and Palestine does not tally with historical facts. And Article 21. The Arab Palestinian people, in expressing itself through the armed Palestinian revolution, rejects all solutions which are substitutes for a complete liberation of Palestine and rejects all plans that aim at the liquidation of the Palestinian problem or its internationalization. Arafat's letter stated, "In view of the promise of a new era and the signing of the Declaration of Principles, and based on Palestinian acceptance of Security Council Resolutions 242 and 338, the PLO affirms that those articles of the Palestinian Covenant which deny Israel's right to exist and the provisions of the covenant which are inconsistent with the commitments of this letter are now inoperative and no longer valid. Consequently, the PLO undertakes to submit to the Palestinian National Council for formal approval the necessary changes in regard to the Palestinian Covenant. But the changes have never been made." While Arafat was indulging in these politics, the German masquerader Rabin went ahead and helped establish Hamas, supposedly as a counterweight to Arafat, but in reality to continue PLO's policies of seeking the destruction of Jews in Israel through terrorism and taking over all the territory for the Palestinians. To justify their claim to the entire land of Israel, Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas, and other Palestinians have been trying to spin the narrative that the Palestinians are the descendants of the original Canaanites whom the Israelites displaced during the days of Moses and Joshua. That is pure fiction. This question has been dealt with in detail in the United Church of God Beyond Today magazine of May-June 2018. During the Ottoman Empire, the land was sparsely populated. Now, a quote from the Beyond Today magazine article. In the late 1600s, during Ottoman rule, a geographer and language expert named Hadriani Rolandi toured the land, surveying about 2,500 places where people lived that were mentioned in the Bible or Mishnah. He recorded his observations in a book published in 1714. So what does the book show? Number one, not one settlement in the land of Israel has a name that is of Arabic or origin. Not one Arabic settlement has an original Arabic name. Number two, most of the land was empty, desolate, and the inhabitants few in number and mostly concentrated in the towns of Jerusalem, Akko, Zafat, Jaffa, Tiberias, and Gaza. Most of the inhabitants were Jews and the rest Christians. There were few Muslims, mostly nomad Bedouins, who arrived in the area as construction and agricultural labor reinforcement seasonal workers. Number three, the book totally contradicts any postmodern theory claiming a Palestinian heritage or Palestinian nation. The book strengthens the connection, relevance, pertinence, kinship of the land of Israel to the Jews, and the absolute lack of belonging to the Arabs. Now, visitors to the land in the 1700s and 1800s commented on its forlorn desolation. The British Council in Palestine reported in 1857, the country is in a considerable degree empty of inhabitants, and therefore its greatest need is that of a body of population. The most famous to speak of the land's condition was the American author Mark Twain in his book The Innocents Abroad after his visit in 1867. Joseph Card summarizes what Twain found. In one location after another, Twain registered gloom at his findings. Stirring scenes occur in the valley Jezreel no more. There is not a solitary village throughout its whole extent, not for 30 miles in either direction. He further wrote of these unpeopled deserts, these rusty mounds of barrenness, that melancholy ruin of Capernaum. We reached Tabor safely. We never saw a human being on the whole route. So the truth is that there are no such people as the original Palestinians. People known today as Palestinians are almost all Arabs who migrated to Israel in search of employment opportunities as Jews began to settle in Palestine in the late 1800s and early 1900s and brought Jewish capital with them. The original Muslim settlers over centuries constituted only about 4.3% of Palestine's population, who were absorbed among the many times larger Arabs that had migrated to Palestine. In fact, before 1948, when the Jewish state of Israel was created, the Jews were known as Palestinians. The so-called Palestinians have admitted in the past that they are merely Arabs who have come and settled in Palestine from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab countries. Here are some more quotes from the magazine article. Yet consider these words of the Palestinian Hamas Interior and National Security Minister Fathi Hamad in March 2012. Who are the Palestinians? Who have many families called Al-Masri, the Egyptian, whose roots are Egyptian. They may be from Alexandria, from Cairo, from Damietta, from the north, from Aswan, from Upper Egypt. We are Egyptians, we are Arabs, we are Muslims, we are part of you. Egyptians, personally, half my family is Egyptian and the other half is Saudi. This is quoted by Pinhas in Bari, who are the Palestinians, and Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, August 7, 2017. Indeed, Palestinian last names show many more national origins. Not what they are not. Note what they are not, a unique people group indigenous to ancient Palestine. In fact, Arafat and his compatriots admitted as such. In a March 31, 1977 interview with the Dutch newspaper Trouw, Palestine Liberation Organization Executive Committee member Zahir Hussein said, "The Palestinian people does not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality today, there is no difference between Jordanians, Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism." This is quoted by Joseph Farah, and Palestinian people do not exist. To summarize, the Palestinians of today are not the descendants of the original Canaanites. They know that they are descendants of Arabs who migrated in search of employment opportunities after Jews had started settling in Palestine in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Therefore, the claim of many of them to the land is not more than 70 or 80 years old. The claim of the modern Jews to the land is a few decades older. So how do we decide who should occupy what part of the land? Since the original Jews and non-Jews before the recent settlers began arriving in the late 1800s are negligible in number and are indistinguishable from the current populations, both peoples have the right to the land. The State of Israel was established in 1948. Before that, the people permanently living in the land had a right to live in it. That's why both Jews and non-Jews have a right to the land. God is not a respecter of persons. Both Jews and non-Jews are equal in His eyes and have an equal right to the land because they came to occupy the land almost simultaneously. Before 1967, Gaza was under Egyptian controls and the West Bank and Israel was under Jordanian control. Before the war, the Arab goal was to drive the Jews into the sea. But Israel won the 1967 war in 6 days, and both Gaza and the West Bank and the Golan Heights from Syria came under Israeli control. Still, the land of Israel belongs both to the Jews and non-Jews living there. Since the two are different peoples and do not want to and will not mix with one another, a two-nation solution, a two-state solution is the only alternative. An important question, therefore, is, does God have a say in who the land belongs to? You will be surprised to know that God has a lot of say on the matter in His prophecies. He holds the Jews and Palestinians accountable for their actions. First of all, Jewish presence in the holy city in Jerusalem is required in the end time to fulfill certain Bible prophecies. Therefore, the Jews living in Israel today is God ordained. The following prophecy is mentioned in Revelation 11 verse 2. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. According to this verse, the holy city, meaning Jerusalem, will be trodden underfoot by Gentiles, meaning non-Israelite nations, for 42 months, or 3.5 years. This means that 42 months the Gentile nations will be in complete control of Jerusalem. This then means that except for those 42 months, Jerusalem will be in control of the Jews. God gave them that control after the 1967 Day War. Another major end-time prophecy that requires the presence of the Jews in the Holy Land was given by Jesus Christ, recorded by Daniel the Matthew the Apostle in Matthew 24 verse 15. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. Then let them be which be in Judea flee into the mountains. In this prophecy, Jesus Christ's disciples had asked him to tell them what the signs of his second coming on earth to set up God's kingdom would be. He was telling them that the events that would take place in the end time just preceding his return. One of the signs he gave was setting up of the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet and the holy place in Jerusalem. Daniel spoke about the abomination of desolation in Daniel 11 verse 31 and Daniel 12 verse 11. He wrote to Daniel in 11:31, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. Daniel mentions in Daniel 12 verse 11, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. These verses tell us that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, meaning forcibly stopped from being offered. Then something called the abomination of desolation shall be set up. In addition, the sanctuary of strength shall be polluted. The sanctuary of strength can only refer to a temple or at least an altar of sacrifices in the holy place. The events mentioned in Daniel 11 were fulfilled in the horrid events of 167 BC in Jerusalem, which are described in 2 Maccabees chapter 5 verses 11 to 15. Antiochus Epiphanes, the ruler of Syria, in whose realm Judah was one of the provinces, thought Judea was in revolt. So he mustered his armed forces and entered Jerusalem and killed 80,000 men, women, and children. He then defiled the temple by setting up a statue of the Greek god Zeus. The abomination of desolation in the Holy of Holies, the holiest innermost being in the most place in the temple, and sacrificed a pig on the temple altar. He stopped the daily sacrifice and tried to stamp out the Jewish religion completely. Antiochus defiled the Jewish temple by dedicating it to the Olympian god Zeus and then offering swine's flesh as sacrifice on the altar. When we look at this historic fulfillment of the prophecy and see that polluting the sanctuary of strength meant offering the wrong kind of sacrifice, in this case a pig. Taking away the daily sacrifice meant stopping the daily Jewish sacrifices, and the abomination of desolation meant setting up a pagan idol in the temple of God. Now consider what Jesus mentioned about the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. When he gave this prophecy, the abomination of desolation prophesied by Daniel had already been fulfilled nearly 200 years ago. But Jesus spoke with the fulfillment of the prophecy yet in the future, just before his second coming. The fulfillment of this prophecy, in fact, during the Great Tribulation yet in the future, as prophesied in Matthew 24 verses 21 to 22. For then shall be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until our time, no nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved alive. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Therefore, this prophecy has a dual fulfillment. God inspired Isaiah the prophet to write in Isaiah 41 verse 22, "Let them bring them forth, and show us what shall happen. Let them show the former things what they be, that we may consider them, and know the latter end of them, or declare us things for to come." This verse is telling us that God himself inspired prophecy to be dual in nature. We thought to look at the former things or events that have stopped previously and that have happened previously and considered them, only then will we understand the latter end of the prophecies or the fulfillment of the same principles in the end time. So, in order to understand the fulfillment of prophecies in our end times, we must consider and understand how they were fulfilled in ancient and former times. End time prophecy indicates that an image will be set up again and worshipped, as stated in Revelation 13, verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming down out of heaven, and the two and had two sons like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. And he deceived them that dwell on the earth for most of these miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, and because that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So the abomination of desolation means some pagan idol or image being set up in the holy place and people forced to worship it. But for sacrifices to be stopped implies that the Jews will constitute sacrifices, which means that they would have control of the holy place and Jerusalem. These prophecies indicate that it has been part of God's plan in the end time to have Jews control the state of Israel and Jerusalem, which they now do. However, that does not give them the right to occupy Palestinian lands and residences. To understand Bible prophecies concerning the Jews in the end time, I did a study on the words Judah, Jew, and Zion and Jerusalem in the temple in the entire Bible. What is ahead for the news in Israel can be summarized in three themes. Jews in Israel will be defeated in the same 30-day war that will defeat the American and British peoples by a German-led coalition alliance, itself allied with the Islamic world and other nations, as stated in Hosea 5 verses 5 to 7. And the pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim, that is Britain, blessing in their iniquity, falling in their iniquity. Judah or the Jews shall fall with them. They have dealt treacherously against the Lord, for they have begotten strange children. Now shall a month or 30 days devour them with their portions. The reason for their defeat are violations of God's 10 commandments and other laws per their covenant made with God at the time of Moses. Revelation 11:2, quoted earlier, had also prophesied that the holy city Jerusalem will be trodden by the Gentiles for 42 months, meaning it will be emptied of the Jews. Some verses that support this are Isaiah 3 verses 8 to 9. For Jerusalem will stumble and Judah will fall, because they speak out against the Lord and refuse to obey him. They provoke him to his face. The very look on their faces gives them away. They display their sin like the people of Sodom. Behold, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom: pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And don't even try to hide it. They are doomed. They have brought destruction upon themselves. Then Isaiah 5 verse 7. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, refers to American and British Commonwealth nations. And the men of Judah refers to the Jews worldwide, his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a city. Then Israeli Jews' promise for dealing with the Palestinians is might is right. When the Arabs thought they were strong, they used the same premise, that is, oppression and not righteousness, which God demands of his people, the Jews. See chapter 8, verses 17 to 18. Have you seen this Son of Man? he is asked, is it nothing to the people of Judah that they commit these detestable things, leading the whole nation into violence, thumping their noses at him, and provoking my anger? Therefore I will respond in fury. I will neither pity nor spare them, and though they cry for mercy, I will not listen. Number 4, Exodus 9 verses 9 to 11. Then he said unto me, the iniquity of the house of Israel, that is America, British Commonwealth nations, and Judah, the Jews, is exceeding great, and the food is full of blood, and the city full of perverseness. For they say, the Lord has forsaken the earth, and the Lord sees not. And as for me also, my eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity, but I will recompense their way upon their dead. And behold, the man clothed with the linen which had the inkhorn by his side, meaning an angel, reported the matter, saying, I have done as you have commanded me. The name is 2 verses 4 to 5. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have despised the law of the land, and have not kept his commandments, and their lies caused them to err, after the which their fathers have walked. But I will send a fire upon Judah, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem. In Micah 3 verses 9 to 12, hear this, I pray you, O heads of the house of Jacob, referring to all 12 tribes of Israel, and that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. 10 build up Zion with blood, and Jerusalem with equity. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, is not the Lord among us? No evil can come upon us. Therefore shall Zion for your sakes be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountain of the house as the high palaces of the forest. Number 9. Hosea the prophet condemns Judah or the Jews, the most specific charge being removing the boundaries of the lands and houses of people. Hosea 5 verses 10 to 15 state, the princes of Judah rulers were like them, that everyone that remove the bound, taking over land and houses belonging to others, such as the Palestinians in Israel for decades. Therefore, continuing, I will pour out my flesh unto Ephraim as a moth, and to the house of Judah or the Jews as rottenness. For I will be unto Ephraim as a lion, and as a young lion to the house of Judah. Even I will tear and go away. I will take army, and none shall rescue. I will take away, and none shall rescue him. I will go and return to my palace till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. In their affliction they will seek me early. The Palestinians and Muslims want Jerusalem and all the land of Israel for themselves. The Roman Catholic Church also wants Jerusalem and particles of the land of Israel for itself, particularly places of biblical significance. When the German-led European alliance with the Islamists succeeds in defeating the American, British, and Jewish alliance, they will cast lots to divide up the land. This is indicated by Obadiah and Joel the prophets. Then Joel 3 verses 1 to 2 and 6. For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring back the captivity of my people Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and will spread with them there for my and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have been sold unto the Grecians of Greece, and you might remove from far from their leader. This indicates that most probably all the Jews will be removed from the land of Israel and sold mainly to the Greeks as slaves and also to other nations. Obadiah successfully identifies the Turks and Palestinians, both of them who are descendants of Esau, as among those who cast lots to divide in Jerusalem. Obadiah 1 verses 9 to 11 state, "And your mighty men of Teman," this is referring to the descendants of the Ottomans, hence Turkey, "and your mighty men of Teman shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For your violence against your brother Jacob, descendants of all the 12 tribes of Israel, including the Jews, shame shall cover you, and you, including the Palestinians, shall be cut off together. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his pieces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even you were as one of them." The second prophetic theme concerning the Jews is that they had the descendants of all the 12 tribes of Israel visit from their time and brought to the land of Israel. No Gentiles, meaning non-Israelites, will remain in the land. Several Bible verses contain this prophecy and indicate that this second Exodus will be much greater than the first Exodus from Egypt, which involved approximately 2 to 3 million men, women, and children. The second Exodus will perhaps involve 10 to 12 million men, women, and children. Isaiah 11 verses 11 to 16. "And it shall come to pass in that trial of the day shall set his hand again against the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria, that is Germany, and Egypt, that is Pathros and Upper Egypt. And Cush, Ethiopia, and India. Cush is divided into Ethiopia and India. Indians are with the straight, wavy kind of hair, whereas the Palestinians are just cut and blind knot. Isaiah 11 verses 11 to 16. "It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria, that is Germany, and Egypt from Pathros, Upper Egypt, and Cush, which is Ethiopia and India, from Elam, which is Iran, and Shinar, which is Iraq, from Hamath, which is in Syria, and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah," meaning the Jews, "from the four corners of the earth. The Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, which is the Red Sea. With his mighty wind he will shake his fist over the river, which generally refers to the Euphrates, and strike it in the 7 streams, and make them cross over dry shod. This is how the captives in Egypt will be brought over to the Holy Land, much like the first Exodus." And continuing, "There will be a highway for the remnant of his people who will be left from Assyria, as it was for Israel in the day that he came up from the land of Egypt." Then Isaiah the prophet continues in chapter 43 verses 1 to 5 and 6, and then 21. "But now thus says the Lord who created you, O Jacob, and he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name. You are mine. Fear not, for I am with you. I will bring your descendants from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not keep them back. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. This people I have found for myself, they shall declare my praise. Now Jeremiah the prophet also prophesied about the greater second Exodus. He wrote in Jeremiah 23 verses 3 to 8. But I will gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I have driven them, and bring them back to their folds, and they shall be fruitful and increase. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. A king, meaning Jesus Christ, shall reign and prosper, and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days, Judah, that is the Jews, will be saved, and Israel, that means the Americans and the British, will dwell safely. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that they shall no longer say, As the Lord lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, but as the Lord lives, who brought up and led the descendants of the house of Israel from the north country and from all the countries where I had driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. Thus, when the world talks about the Exodus, they will not refer to the first Exodus from Egypt, which will be forgotten, but to the second Exodus, the much greater Exodus from all around the world. Jeremiah then records in chapter 31, verses 8 to 11. Behold, I will bring them from the north country, and gather them from the ends of the earth, among them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, and the one who labors with child. Together a great throng shall return there. They shall come with weeping, and with supplications I will lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of waters, in a straight way in which they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim the British is my firstborn. Hear the word of the Lord, O nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He who scattered Israel will gather him, and keep him as the shepherd does his flock. For the Lord has redeemed Jacob, and ransomed him from the land of the one stronger than he. God also prophesied that all those Gentiles, that means non-Israelites, who occupied Israel will be destroyed. Obadiah 1 verses 15 to 20 state, And the day of the Lord upon all the nations is near. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reprisals shall return on your own head, and they shall be as though they had never been. But on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. The house of Jacob includes the Jews, shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph, that means the former American and British slaves, a flame. But the house of Esau, which includes the Turks and Palestinians, many of whom are descendants of the Amalekites, shall be stubble. They shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. The south shall possess the mountains of Esau, south of Asian resident, and the lowland shall possess Philistia, that means Gaza. They shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria. Benjamin also shall possess Gilead, and the captives of his host of the children of Israel shall possess the land, and the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, which is north of ancient Israel. The captives of Jerusalem who are in Sephard shall possess the cities of the south. Now Zephaniah the prophet declares that no one of the Palestinians will survive. Zephaniah 2 verses 5 to 9 state, Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Cherethites, under the word of the Lord, which is against you, O Canaan, and the land of the Philistines. I will even destroy you. There shall be no inhabitant, and the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed thereupon. And the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening, for the Lord their God shall visit them and turn away their iniquity. The third theme concerning the Jews is that they will be sought after by all nations to teach them God's way, because many will have lived among them and understood their language and culture. Zephaniah 8 verse 23 states, Thus says the Lord God, In those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold of all the languages of the people, even shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, We will go with you, for we have heard that God is for you. The first prophetic theme concerning the Jews indicates that by their policies in Israel, the Jews are courting disaster. In part 2 of this video, I will discuss how the Jews in Israel have run afoul of government's standard of conduct for his people, and what policies they should pursue to deal with the Palestinians that do not violate God's judgment. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos, World War III watch video, politics, international business, advice on health and family problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis, including the World War. Also, please subscribe to my Facebook channel, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos. My YouTube channel has exactly the same name, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjeet Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events. Thank you very much.